Hey guys, it's QuickyBaby and welcome back to World of Tanks. This time I've got something exceptionally exciting for you. This is the Tier 10 Swedish Heavy tank, the Kranvagn. I'm going to show you why this is certainly going to be one of the most powerful Tier 10 tanks in the game, how it stacks up to its competitors such as the AMX50B and the T57 Heavy, and follow it up with some gameplay showcasing why this possibly might be the best turret ever in World of Tanks. So firstly, just a quick mention that I'm not using TanksGG this time, I'm using ZippyHo Tankopedia because TanksGG has failed to update very quickly for quite a while. But here we have the Tier 10 Swedish heavy tank, the Kranvagn, the AMX50B, the Tier 10 French auto-loading heavy tank, which looks very similar, right? And also the T57 Heavy, everybody's favorite go-to American Tier 10 autoloader. So immediately we notice that the Kranvagn doesn't have the highest hit points at 2,000 instead of the 2,100 that the French tank gets and the 2,250 that the T57 Heavy gets, so less durability than the other two tanks there. However, it has the best power to weight ratio, would you believe it, even better than the AMX50B. And when we look at the terrain resistances for these tanks, we also see that the Kranvagn has the same terrain resistance on hard as the 50B, just a little bit worse than the T57 Heavy, the same on moderate terrain, and the same on soft terrain as the 50B, which means that this vehicle is going to be just as fast as the AMX50B. Well, at least regards to its acceleration, because its top speed limit is limited to 60 rather than the 65 of the 50B, but that still means that this tank is going to be very, very fast, and it will certainly run rings around the American Tier 10 autoloader. So how about the hull armor of the Kranvagn? Well, it's 110mm, which isn't bad, but that doesn't compare to the AMX50B's awesome 170mm of hull armor and the T57 Heavy's 228mm. But at least the side armor is 70, which is way better than the 50B and the T57 Heavy, and your rear armor is 37. That's not great. High explosive rounds are going to give you a lot of troubles in the back of this tank. However, guys, the turret armor is a completely different story. Just like the Emil 2, it's taking it to a whole new level. 225mm of turret armor. That just leaves the AMX50B in the dust, and it even outcompetes the T57 Heavy's turret, which has a key advantage over the 50B. Just to put this turret into perspective, when you are not angling at all, this turret has 386mm of effective armor. Even the best premium rounds in the game are going to struggle to penetrate the Kranvagn's turret armor when it's not angling at all, or using any of the 12 degrees of gun depression that this tank gets. When this tank is using its 12 degrees of gun depression, even the best premium rounds in the game are not even going to have a chance in hell of going through its armor, as we can see the bottom right hand corner showing an effective thickness of 600mm. And it certainly makes the weak turret armor of the AMX50B look absolutely awful. The AMX50B has at best about 200mm of effective turret armor, and even when it's using its maximum gun depression, there are still some parts of the turret that are less than 200mm thick. And that really is the speciality of the Kranvagn. Definitely one of, if not the best turret armors in the game. And if you're worried about this flat part under the gun being a weak point on the tank when it's not depressing its gun, it is 380mm thick, so don't even try it. The hull armor as well, at least frontally, isn't too bad. Angled like this, the upper thickness is up to 270-300mm of effective armor, and the lower plate is still at about 220. And so that means that if you're on a level playing field with the Kranvagn, you definitely want to be shooting it in the lower plate with hopefully about 240mm of penetration to go through this tank. But if you're above the vehicle, then you're still best to shoot down on the upper hull armor. Don't even think about shooting it in the turret, even if you're above it. Furthermore, the tank has very small cupolas on top of the vehicle, and as we can see here, they are very challenging to hit over the top part of this armor. And of course, when the vehicle is using its 12 degrees of gun depression, you don't stand a chance of hitting them. One thing that I did notice on this tank, however, is that we can see that it has two ears that come out here. Now, this actually counts as 50mm of spaced armor, but one thing that I noticed frontally on this tank is that you can fire high explosive at them and splash over the side armor of the turret, damaging it quite considerably. And so if a Kranvagn is using his gun depression and his ears are sticking out, take advantage and fire high explosive rounds at them, not armor piercing or heat rounds. You need them to explode on the ears and hopefully take out the side of the turret. One thing that is a little disappointing about the Kranvagn is the 25 degrees of turret traverse that the vehicle gets, which is way worse than the AMX-50B and the T57 Heavy at 36 degrees a second. And that's a little bit annoying because all of your armor is focused at the front of the tank, and so for it to take so long to be able to turn the turret compared to the other two autoloaders, it's hard to keep your most effective armor in position. View range wise, the Kranvagn has 390 meters, which is a little bit less than what you would expect on a tier 10 tank, as 400 really is the standard here. One thing I'd quickly like to highlight about this tank is that these depression values are just wrong. The Kranvagn actually has 12 degrees of gun depression and 10 degrees of elevation, whereas the AMX-50B and the T57 Heavy, as we can clearly see here, have got 8 degrees of depression and 12 degrees of elevation each. And let me tell you, 12 degrees of gun depression on the Kranvagn just gives it so much flexibility on the ridgeline. It's absolutely incredible. This is the most depressing tier 10 tank, and is certainly an ace up the sleeve of the Kranvagn. So how about the gun? How does this 120mm compare to that of the T57 Heavy and the AMX-50B? Well, we can see that the reload is just a little better than the AMX-50B, but just a little bit worse than the T57 Heavy, so it sits right in the middle of these two tanks. Aiming time wise, however, it's 2.5 seconds, which is just as competitive as the AMX-50B and gives the vehicle an advantage over the T57 Heavy. But remember, looking at the aim time alone is not good enough. We also have to look at the dispersion while moving, and for the Kranvagn it is 0.2, which is a little bit worse than the AMX-50B, but much better than the T57 Heavy, 20% better to be exact. And look at the accuracy loss when you turn the turret. It is 0.1, just as good as the AMX-50B and way better than the T57 Heavy's 0.18. So this will make the Kranvagn way better at firing on the move and also quickly after turning the turret compared to the T57 Heavy, and it'll be just as competitive as the AMX-50B within that regard. This tank gets the same 4-round 120mm autoloader as the AMX-50B and the T57 Heavy, giving it a total potential damage, well at least on average, of 1,600. But it is very important to also take into account the delay of the shells. Here we have the Kranvagn, we have the AMX-50B, and we also have the T57 Heavy's gun. And we can clearly see that the Kranvagn does have a key disadvantage, and that is that it takes 2.75 seconds to load each of the shells in its magazine. So while it only takes the American T57 Heavy 6 seconds after the first shot to fire off its remaining shells, it takes the AMX-50B 7.5 seconds, and it is going to take the Swedish Kranvagn 8.25 seconds to fire off its entire magazine. Now that is certainly a very long time, and it would undoubtedly be a massive weakness of the tank if it didn't have such awesome turret armor that if it only exposes, nothing's going to penetrate it during those extra 2.25 seconds compared to the T57 Heavy. But of course, if you get into those awkward brawling situations where somebody's maybe got the side of your tank or they're putting round after round into your lower plate, then it might take the Kranvagn just too long to be able to unload its 4 shells to kill the enemy quickly and then to either relocate or start reloading. And so it's certainly not the end of the world for T57 Heavy drivers, because this gun is still definitely the best at short to mid-range combat when you don't need to use the turret armor or have the extra 4 degrees of gun depression. So accuracy wise, the Kranvagn is just a little less accurate than the AMX-50B and the T57 Heavy at 0.36. That's definitely something to watch out for. And one thing that's very disappointing about the Kranvagn is that even though it has APCR as its standard ammunition, as we can clearly see here, they go really slowly, 1,000 meters a second, of course if this website is correct, which is actually slower than the armor-piercing ammunition of the AMX-50B and the T57 Heavy. And if the AMX-50B loads its premium APCR rounds and we load the heat rounds that the Kranvagn gets, then unfortunately while the Kranvagn loses shell velocity, which only go at 840 meters a second, the AMX-50B shells fly clean through the air 1,334 meters a second with those APCR rounds, which certainly gives the AMX-50B a clear advantage if you are willing to fire the occasional premium round. And so you know what, I think that's quite enough theory crafting. Let's see how this new Swedish beast performs in some gameplay. So here we go, still getting used to those new Swedish crew voices, hey? And this was my first ever game in the Kranvagn, and I was super excited to play this tank. When I saw the statistics of this vehicle, I almost couldn't believe what I was seeing. Oh wow, look at the shell through the side of the turret there. I love the way they've embellished the model of this tank. It does look absolutely beautiful. So let's take a look at the mobility of the Kranvagn. We're keeping up with an Object 140. We're leaving the T10 E5 in our dust behind. That's because the mobility of this tank pretty much exactly the same as the AMX-50B, which is definitely one of the faster heavies at tier 10. We're going to be able to get our speed up going down this slope. 45, 50, 52. Capped out at 52 there, didn't quite manage to get up to 60, but we've still managed to get into position as fast as all of the medium tanks on the enemy team would. We've tried and ambushed the Object 140. Look at the gun depression of this tank. Can you believe it? This vehicle will just open all sorts of opportunities for positional work. And guys, do you hear those ricochets? Do you hear the sizzles? These guys are firing premium rounds at you, as you would expect on a test server. And, wow, ricochet, 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 ricochet. These are 330mm penetration shells that are hitting our tank here, and none of them are going through our vehicle. Look at the front of the tank. Look at all these ricochets in the first minute of this battle all over the front of the turret. Maybe the Swedish flags are the weak point of this tank. I'm only joking. But unfortunately, I was unable to penetrate any of my shells as well. But right now, I was just testing the armor of the tank, and I think this is point proven, guys. As I was showing you with the armor model viewer, that you have got about 500mm of effective armor in this tank when you are using 12 degrees of gun depression. Nothing in the game is going to penetrate you. The only thing they could do is fire high explosive rounds at your tank. But not that many people actually think to do that. But that is definitely something that I would recommend doing against the Kranvagn. High explosive really is the only way. Now we're going to poach this Object 140. 1 into his tank. 2 into his tank. And look at the depression, so much flexibility. Aim time is so much better than the T57 Heavy. And we don't even need to fire the 4th as he burns to death. 1,489 damage done there to that Soviet medium tank. And we didn't even take any fire. In fact, the only thing that has done damage to us this game has been an artillery shell, as you would expect. More heat rounds bouncing off the turret. Now I'm going to make a little bit of a mistake here. I'm just going to go into third person to show you what I did. I actually enabled him to shoot right on the beak of my tank. Look at that, the beak of the lower plate. So he was able to finally penetrate. And oh, come on, man. 886 damage from the artillery. Oh well, let's just forget about the artillery. Let's repair my turret and my tracks, and let's go and kick this E5's butt. We put a 1 into him so far, actually a couple into him. We finish him off there. 1,181 damage done with 3 rounds to the T10E5. The STRV-103B finishing him off, and I turn my attention to the Object 140. And really, the only thing that has damaged us this game is the shot to the lower plate of this tank, and it was a heat round from the T10E5. And apart from that, artillery, right? I hate people testing artillery on the test server. It just... all we really want to do on the test server, right, guys, is to test the gun capabilities. We want to be able to test how the armor works in the game. We want to go aggressively on ridge lines, especially a tank like this, to be able to test down the artillery. It's just, I guess, they're the kind of people who just want to spoil the fun, right? So not a bad magazine there as well. We managed to put 2 into a gorilla, miss 1 on the E50M, so we're unable to finish him off, but we put another 1 into him as well. We bounced a couple of rounds from the Kranvagn on the enemy team, and luckily for me, the artillery misses me, otherwise I would have certainly have bit the dust there. So look at this. I cannot believe how awesome this 12 degrees of gun depression is. Usually, this is one of the reasons why I love the Comet. The Comet with its 12 degrees of gun depression is just absolutely beautiful for me. But to be able to have it on a heavy tank that has impenetrable armor against pretty much anything that anyone's ever going to be able to shoot at it is just crazy. So I quickly reverse. I don't even bother to shoot at the Kranvagn's turret there. I know that I'm not going to be able to pen it. There's no point. The only thing I really should have done in retrospect in this replay is probably reload a high explosive round. But the T92 does it for me, shutting down the tier 10 Swedish heavy tank. And now I try to use the mobility of the vehicle to see if we can pump up our damage a little bit. Guys, that was 5,350 damage ricocheted with our armor there. And every single one of them was a premium round with pretty much 330mm of penetration. If that is not a test of how awesome the armor is on this tank, I really don't know what is. At least in a real game situation, right? Of course, we could line up. Should we jump back a few months and line up 15 WTRV 100s on the enemy team and all get them to shoot at it with their 350mm of APCR pen, not a single one of them would be going in. Honestly, none of them would be going in, even if they all rolled plus 25% penetration. None of them are going to be going into the tank. Now I'm firing high explosive rounds because I wanted to take down the Gorilla. There we go. Finishing off the tier 10 German tank destroyer, Talk of the Devil. Now we're going to make our way over to see if we can take out the artillery. So what do you guys think about the look of this vehicle? I think it is absolutely gorgeous. I guess it's like an AMX 50B, but I just think that the angles are so much sharper. I like the way that they've embellished the tank as well, and I love the little features like the shell that we like the shell that is stuck into the tank here. I think that is absolutely awesome, and it definitely makes this a very immersive tank to play. I just absolutely love this vehicle. I really do. It's my favorite tier 10 in World of Tanks in absolutely ages, and I cannot wait to play it on the live server. So this was our first game in the Kranvagn, and it was also a first class medal. We also nailed a steel wall, and boy, what a steel wall it was. 5,750 damage blocked with our armor, and as I mentioned, the only things that really damaged our tank was the lower plate hit from the T1025's heat round, and also the artillery, I guess, testing how good high explosive work against a lightly armored tier 10 heavy, at least with regards to the side armor. Damage wise in this 5-minute game, we picked up 4,637 damage. If I just had a little bit longer to work, I'm sure there would have been something special coming from this. So of course, remember, this is a test server, and it's a test server for a reason. Everything that you see is subject to change. There could be substantial nerfs to this tank before it hits the live server, or alternatively substantial buffs, although I think that the former is far more likely. So what happens if you fire high explosive rounds at the Kranvagn's turret? Let's try and take a swipe at the Swedish flag. 99 damage with 150mm high explosive round. That is 950 average damage and 85mm of penetration. That's not going to do a lot, and you're certainly going to have to put a lot of shots into this tank to be able to take it out quickly, as we only removed 4% of its hit points. However, I thought to myself, why not try and shoot the 50mm of spaced armor that it has over the ears, and 532 damage. And so if you get a shot at a stationary Kranvagn and you can hit its ears, which only have 50mm of spaced armor protecting the very weak side armor of the tank, you can do substantial damage to the tank. Let's test it again. Look, 518 damage. That is a quarter of its hit points taken off in a single shot with a high explosive round. And so while I'm not suggesting it's realistic to be able to only snipe at such a small weak point of an enemy tank with high explosive rounds, and albeit large caliber high explosive rounds at that, what I am suggesting is that we are going to have to come up with creative ways to be able to whittle down these tanks, or at least pose a threat to them. And firing high explosive rounds is certainly one of those. But all in all, I think this tank is amazing. I cannot wait to play it. 12 degrees of flexible gun depression, impressive mobility statistics, a decent enough gun. You're going to feel like an IS-7 when it's hiding its lower plate, when you're only using the turret of this tank. And while I don't think that this tank is going to completely revolutionize the way that World of Tanks is played, it is definitely going to have a profound impact in the matchmaker if you don't know how to handle it. And so hopefully this video was useful to you, or maybe you just enjoyed it. If you did, please consider giving it a like. It really helps the channel out, and let me know in the comments down below what you think about the Kranvagn. Do you think that it looks absolutely awesome? Do you think that it looks fairly mediocre? Do you think that this vehicle is going to be overpowered if it's implemented into the game as it is? Or do you think that the long delay time between its shells and its fairly weak side armor mitigate its advantages? And as always, guys, thank you so much for watching. You've been epic, and hopefully I'll see you soon.